There's a man who lives 3 blocks down. He lets us play in his backyard. We think his name is Jesus, but he prints it up Jesus and hands it out on a business card. Tread alongside someone, baby, someone to walk with me. Tread alongside someone I don't want to be. Not alone with you and me. Tread alongside someone I don't want to be. Alone with me.
I think this is fake.
You can't say that. I can say that.
Wrestling's not fake!
It's still real to me, damn it!
The unscripted, uncensored, loose cannon of commentary. This ain't WCW. This ain't Monday Night Raw. This ain't SmackDown. This ain't even WWE.
Do I have everybody's attention now?
The recognized symbol of excellence in sports entertainment.
You're listening to Marks on Commentary.
I'm Eddie Brophy.
I'm Jason Smith.
And we are Marks Off Commentary, I guess is the name Jason has settled with this week.
Yep.
It just sounds kind of dirty, marking off. Sounds like an internet slang for, wrestling fans who cream their pants every time they're like getting really excited about something.
I marked off in my pants.
I may or may not use that a few times at WrestleMania with Jason. Jason, would you cut the shit and start marking off? I think that should have been a t-shirt. # marking off.
Next one.
That'll be the next hashtag. The next round of t-shirts that Michael Sears will buy. Big Jim, our loyal supporters on this show. Well, Jason, you had a goal in mind this week. You mind sharing with our listeners what that goal was?
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing this show now a year, and we kind of never really talk about us personally. And I think it'd be kind of cool just to give people a background on who we are as people.
Now, since this is like an origin show, this is the prequel, if you will, or the Christopher Nolan revamp of Marks on Commentary.
Marks begin.
Marks begins. The Flannel Night rises. Would you like me to, how far back do you want to go? Do you want to go to that first night in the public access station, or do you want to go to the true genesis of the show, which was, you may or may not have been at home for this, but as I've pointed on the show before, Jason and I, essentially, I used to do a podcast, God, 3 years ago now. Long story short, I was underemployed. I was still working in radio, but I didn't have like a steady part-time job. I'd worked for this comedian who actually still lives and operates out of the town I now live in, which is unfortunate. And I quit there just due to the fact that, all right, I'll put it bluntly, a man who looked like a fat Ben Franklin and smelled really bad and would constantly give me these like rants about how much he loved his second wife, yada yada, and she was disgusting, mind you, and would give me like all these kind of like rants and raves about this woman, was using his business email to communicate with other women on AshtonMadison.com. This man actually told me on 2 occasions that I was ugly. The first being that I was ugly, and the second being when I went with a now ex-girlfriend to see him. He sat next to me and just kind of like motioned over me. He was like, "Ed, you're not the best looking guy in the room, so she really loves you for you." I figured that was enough to merit not wanting to work there anymore. So where does this take us? So I started doing a podcast with my good friend Cammy. It was called Eddie and Cammy Make a Podcast. Of course, it was, Jason would appreciate the reference, as we've talked about the namesake before, the movie, the Kevin Smith movie. But as that started to wind down, because my friend Cammy, her husband at the time was in Afghanistan, and she found out she was pregnant with her first child. So she kind of went on sabbatical, and I tried to do it on my own. I got help from this guy Phil and my good friend Jabo. And then she came back, and then she was pregnant with child number 2. And at the time, I was living at home, working 2 jobs, and essentially wasn't worried about my reputation on the internet. If you ask Jason or anyone who's personally Facebook friends with me, I'm still really not. I kind of figured, the last thing I want to do is continue doing a show with a woman who has a husband, 2 kids, and given the content of the nature of the show, it probably wouldn't suit her to stay on doing it with me.
Yeah.
That was when Jason, I believe I was working at the radio station. I was working at the rock station I was at, and I was a producer.
Mhm.
I was, grossly underpaid and unappreciated. And again,
Common theme for this show.
yeah, I mean, I was working, and Bob, oh my God, that conversation with Bob was so amazing because he pretty much summed up being a radio DJ or aspiring radio DJ. What I'm getting at here is don't do it. Do not invest any money in those broadcasting schools. Don't get me wrong, as much as I love the people I met, and they were so good to me when I was employed there, it's like college. It's a giant pyramid scheme. But Jason had mentioned wanting to do a podcast for a long time, especially when I was doing Eddie and Cammy. And at the time, a lot of people consider that podcast a success.
Mhm.
Mind you, the numbers we pull now, well, some people could argue like, oh, those aren't very big. I think Cammy and I, during our first run, we got like maybe 100 a week. And that was like really insane to me.
Mhm.
And then it kind of, tapered off to it was like 50 a week. So it wasn't impressive, but it was still cool that anyone would listen. And then I got the Podomatic subscription where you can actually see how many people are actually listening versus people that are skipping. And then it was heartbreaking. And I'll never do it again, hence why we're so cheap with the show. But Jason had approached me with wanting to do kind of like a podcast. And at the time, I'd kind of become jaded about the whole thing. Like, I tried this, I tried that. I had a very unsuccessful YouTube show entitled How to Solve Your First World Problems with Thrift Store Existentialism and Dress Park Bed Sheets. And I don't know, Jason, I remember he asked me and I agreed. And it was about a year before it really took off the ground. But, he was constantly sending me like the logo he had sent me, marks and commentary. This is what I want to do with it. And it wasn't until February of last year when he was like, here's where I work, here's the address, you should come up and do this. And I was apprehensive at first because, again, going back to that comedian who told me I'm not a very good looking guy, I've always been very camera shy because I know I'm not George Clooney. But the broadcast school I went to, I had a lot of training in video work, and I was told, and I'm not saying this to be arrogant, I was told I was very good at it. So I figured, what the hell? And Jason and I went up and shot that first episode of Marks and Commentary in the public access studio, which will not be named. It was a lot of fun. Like, I had a blast doing it. And, I was really nervous because when Jason gave me the title of the show, I thought we were actually going to be commentating matches. Like, I thought that was the whole idea of the show. I didn't realize it was going to be kind of like a stream of consciousness, kind of like a bantering, a back and forth just about the product. And, I am not shy about telling people I do love wrestling. I've been a fan, but I'm not like, if you were to stop me on the stream, like, you're Eddie from Marks and Commentary, blah, 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 and give me like all your encyclopedic knowledge of wrestling, I'll probably look at you like I'm either stoned or I just shit my pants. Because I'm not like a wealth of wrestling knowledge. But it was enough that, well, here's a guy that knows more than I do, but I can definitely kind of play off him. So the first episode was really cool. And the coolest thing about the show, and maybe I'm getting too personal here, is Jason and I didn't really know each other.
Yeah.
I joked the last show that the very first time I met you was actually 6th grade. We were both in Bobo classes, which is still a title for special ed classes. I have a learning disability in math, which essentially means that I'm more right-brained than left. So when it comes to like foreign languages, math, science, I'm an idiot. But when it comes to using 50-cent words like supercilious or expunge, I'm a master. And Jason and I were sitting in class, and I had drawn a picture of Chucky on, when you take the brown shopping bags and you make the covers for the books.
Yeah.
Unlike the cool kids, I wasn't really into music at the time, which was kind of weird. I was really into horror movies. So I used to just like doodle like Freddy Krueger and Jason and stuff on, because I was a happy child. And Jason just started talking to me, and I'd never met him before because you were a Central School kid. I was a South School Robin Hood kid.
That's right.
Which to anyone listening, that means nothing.
One part of town versus the other part of town.
So Jason started talking to me about horror movies. And I mean, to this day, if you talk to me about horror movies, it's like instant, we'll be friends for life. Aside from that, and Jason had a girlfriend and I didn't, and that really bothered me.
It's do I be mean right now or do I not be mean?
Don't be mean, Jason.
Okay.
It was 6th grade. But
okay,
anyway.
fair enough.
Yes, I was I had a bowl haircut. I had skin tight jeans because I remember I got picked on a lot that year for my skin tight jeans, high top sneakers, and like button down shirts, and an overbite. So you can imagine the horrors I went through. So anyone interacting with me was like a huge deal. But if they had a girlfriend, fuck them. So we had talked a bit in sixth grade. I remember I joked about this, but you were like really protective of professional wrestling. Because I remember I went from being this kind of nerdy horror movie kid who you barely knew to like, I remember, I think it was the next semester we'd switched into a smaller classroom. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, I remember Jason wearing the Road Dogg shirt, and I would kind of laugh because I was, again, white trash. So when I saw the Roll This Dog a Bone t-shirt, immediately I got the, haha, I know what that means.
And of course I didn't, and none of the teachers had no clue, and I'm surprised I never got stopped for it.
And of course the 420 carved on the bone was a dead giveaway. But I remember just like, at the time, I lived with my niece Haley's father, and my oldest sister lived downstairs, and her dad was a huge professional wrestling fan, and he used to always try to get me. That was the phase when everybody realized how painfully uncool I was. So like they'd start pushing, because I had grown up with like New Kids on the Block, Nirvana, Guns N' Roses, but I was never like a huge music fan. This is during like the Limp Bizkit Significant Other era and like Korn Follow Leader issue. So I started randomly showing up to school in like Korn and Limp Bizkit shirts, and then like part of the manifestation of trying to, or the creation of making me cool was they wanted to get me to watch professional wrestling, which it was a bunch of, at the time felt like old guys, but really they're all in their 20s. And they were taking cheese graters to each other's heads and steel chairs and, suplex people through tables, and, people got lit on fire. And I'm like, why have I not been watching this? And I'd been kind of in and out over the years. I remember I walked into class and I was wearing a Stone Cold shirt, the one I talked about last show. Jason got really defensive. Like, who the fuck is this kid? I'll show him.
Territorial, because I thought at that time I was like, I never had going back to like Central School, like I was the Power Ranger kid. And then at a certain point, everybody turned and was like, Power Rangers is shit. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it was like, you're the Power Ranger kid, and that's all you like. So when I found wrestling and I kind of got into it, and then it was like, oh, it's popular, I was like, all right, I need to protect,
Can I interrupt you for like 5 seconds?
Yeah.
And this is something that's kind of a revelation. The first being that when Nina found out that, we were getting really close and we did the show together, I'm like, do you remember Jason? Because Jason remembers you. And this is like a Nina's nightmare. Because as soon as we start dating, like everyone remembered Nina, or like a specific era of Nina. Because mind you, she's a woman. Like when you're a teenage girl, you go through your bitchy phase. Like you're experimenting with different phases. And the first thing she said was, I don't remember much, but I remember him as the Power Ranger kid.
Yeah.
And I laughed because when I first moved to Stoneham in second grade, despite the fact that I knew how to tie my shoes, I was adamant that I had to rock the Power Ranger Velcro sneakers. And apparently, because I was a Melrose transplant. So again, if you're from Massachusetts, or even people from Massachusetts, what the fuck's a Melrose? Melrose and Stoneham were essentially rivals. Mm-hmm. So people found out you were from Melrose and they were like, homegrown in Stoneham, they immediately hated you. So I had the stigma of the fact that I was from Melrose, and the fact that I was the only 7-year-old still rocking like head to toe Power Rangers. So kind of like Jason, when I first discovered horror movies, I was very territorial. I used to show up to school. This is not a lie. I used to own Fangoria magazine. I used to cut out pictures of Michael Myers and scotch tape them to like my t-shirts. And I used to get like destroyed over that. Like people thought it was the most fucked up thing you could do. But it was essentially because I was trying to find my identity. And at the time, like a 4th, 5th grader watching slasher movies was like really controversial and like really messed up. Yeah. Point where like I had a teacher in 4th grade calling like the only 3 or 4 friends I had, their parents, and being like, get them away from this kid Eddie. He's kind of a mess. So I can agree with you on that one. Like I was very territorial. Like I was like, again, the bucktooth misfit kid who nobody like, it was the typical, he smells bad, he doesn't clean his ears enough, like he has dandruff. Like I was that kid just because circumstances of being, the baby in the family, and having an older sister with bipolar and the other being pregnant. Not a lot of the resources go to you. So it was kind of like, oops, we forgot to clean you up today or whatever. So you were always kind of trying to find something that you could identify with whatever the hell wasn't what people knew you for. Like you were trying so hard to get away from that.
Mhm.
And for me, that was horror movies, and clearly for Jason, that was wrestling.
Yeah.
And that was sixth grade. I remember seventh grade. I don't even know how it happened, but I want to say like springtime in seventh grade. A bunch of my friends and I. Well, my parents went to California. They went because my grandfather had passed. No, my grandmother had passed away. And I remember this guy, Rich, my niece's father, had said, "Why don't you have a bunch of your buddies over and we'll wrestle?" Because at that point, like me and this guy, Rich, and he was in his like late 20s, we used to set up boxes like before Monday Night Raw. Every night we used to set up boxes around him and my sister's bed. And essentially, it was just like it was a squash match. Like he would just suplex me into boxes and beat me over the head with plastic belts. And it sounds messed up, but that used to be like the high. It was an adrenaline rush because I used to like go into my dad's medical cabinet and take out like the tape and like run downstairs with a cutoff T-shirt and like think like I actually had a chance. And it was right around the time, it was after the year where Mick Foley had won the title, whatever, and I completely identified with him. Because he wasn't really, for what it's worth, he's not really a wrestler. Like, he was kind of, I don't even know he was such a great character that you almost overlooked the fact that he couldn't wrestle, but his endurance for pain was so insane that it made him phenomenal. And that was kind of what I wanted to be growing up.
Mhm.
And somewhere around there, a bunch of buddies and I just started backyard wrestling. Like, it wasn't like a thing, it was just instinctive. Like, we'd be in a backyard and like, remember the summer of sixth grade going to seventh, we'd all pretend like I'm Ken Shamrock, I'm Mick Foley, and like we'd like we had a kid, they used to yank his shoe off and pull his sock off and do sock road. It was the most disgusting thing in the world. And then you'd have the girl that wanted to be China and she'd be low blowing all the guys, and it hurt. And of course, I always wanted to be like X-Pac or like Undertaker or something. And I don't know, it just kind of stemmed from there. And someone had the bright idea of let's videotape us beating the hell out of each other.
Yeah.
And because, like you, I'm like such an entertainment background with whatever. Like I would make these elaborate sets out of ladders and trash cans that we'd enter through. And I remember the first one we did was my neighbor Derek. I won't say his last name, but he was an indie wrestler. He used to wrestle in the local VFW halls and stuff like that. He did eventually go on to wrestle one dark match for WWF, but. So he showed up with my niece's father in the backyard, and like they were playing the music, and he brought over his championship belts from that he won in certain companies he wrestled for. And then it kind of like I remember this kid Joe Maloney, he was the one taping it because he knew this kid Danny Powers, who was like an audiovisual nerd.
Yep.
And the tapes just started circulating around the school, and all of a sudden people were talking about it. Unbeknownst to me, however, Jason was kind of trying to do the same thing.
Well, it started out actually, I don't know, were you in drama set design?
I was, because
Okay.
the reason I was in drama set design, probably like anyone else, was because you could miss a full day of school.
Yes, that was the reason behind me doing it. Plus, I guess you could say I'm creative and kind of can come up with some stuff, but it was like, oh, I'm not a jock. I don't like doing any of that shit. This seems somewhat fun, and you can hang around and fuck around with your friends. So that's why I went to drama and shit.
Well, no, and it's funny you say that because those were also the seeds of backyard wrestling, was because I had, like a goon, I'd ridden my bike across town to get the new WWF Championship belts because they were like 3D.
Yeah.
And I remember I stashed up enough money that I bought one, and like we would wrestle in the backyard, and we would always kind of like, you're the champion now. No, you're the champion. I remember in drama class, like everyone wanted to treat my belt that I bought with my own money. It was the 24/7 title. So like, if the teacher was out of the room for 5 minutes, I'd look at my buddy and be like, "You, hit me with a steel chair." Like, just because we were so adamant, like we kind of wanted, because again, wrestling was mainstream at that point, but like only the jocks could get away with wearing like the Rock Poontang Pie shirts. Like if Jason and I walked around like an Undertaker or a Road Dogg, we were geeks essentially. I think you can vouch for that.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So it was kind of like, yeah, drama was like a bunch of misfits. It was me, you, that's Sean Spring. It was in there, and like literally, like we would just all kind of like, because we were all set guys.
Yeah.
And like I didn't design anything. I just moved shit. And I barely did that.
So, somebody else told me what to make.
Yeah. For the most part, I used to just sit with a notebook and like come up with like matches for that weekend, while I'd go like friends into hitting each other with shit that if the teacher left the room, like we would find props and we'd hit each other in the face with them or something.
Yeah.
And then Yeah, it just that summer for me personally was the summer where like we really all got into it. We invested in costumes and you know would like try to like bribe somebody into letting us use their backyard and whatever. And unbeknownst to us, you guys are kind of doing the same thing.
Well, yeah, like at that same time, I can't remember which came first, but I remember hearing like through the grapevine that some one of the teachers like during a study hall allowed you guys to play the tape in the class. And to me that captured my imagination like holy shit, like you know what I mean? Like you have like a full theater of like people that can't go anywhere and you can do something cool and like put it up there. I wasn't in those classes, but for me that captured my mind and I'm like, yeah, I can do that. So
That actually was funny because I wasn't in that class. It was Joe Maloney was asking to be excused from class so he could put the tape in his locker, and the teacher who was a wrestling fan was like, "Oh, what is it?" And he was all embarrassed, like, "Oh, well, we do this thing on the weekends," and they played it, and like all the jock guys were like, "Dude, can we come and do that?" One of which was like a 200-pound kid,
mhm.
and I remember Joe was like, "Oh, this kid really wants to do it. He's a jock. Like, we could be cool." I'm like, "Dude, he will kill us." Like that kid does like one leg drop on us, it's over. Like I think I'm 124, 130 pounds now. I think around that I had to be like 90 pounds soaking wet. The guy still walking around with a shirt that said "Chicks dig scrawny pale guys," which they did. But yeah, it was weird because then that summer we got all into it. I remember that fall, everybody was kind of off doing their own thing because obviously some of us were in middle school, some of us were like in fifth grade, and then and as believe it or not, some of my guys were going into high school.
Yeah.
I remember the downfall was that like one of my guys discovered pot. So, me being me, like I was a dorky horror movie watching. I'd sit on weekends and like this was back in the day when like used to actually there was no cell phones and child molesters. It was a thing, but it wasn't like nobody left the house. So like over the weekend you'd ring doorbells or at 10 a.m. you'd be calling the house phone, be like, "Can so and so come out and play?" Like you running around with your friends, and like for a lot of us it would just be we'd find one of our idiot friends who would, we basically bully into letting us wrestle in their yard, and we do that. And around that time, I remember Sean Springett had been talking with you,
Yeah.
and him and Danny Powers were like, "Let's get Jason in on this." I didn't know you very well. I was like,
Yeah,
"All
I
right."
didn't know you. I barely knew you. Like I knew you from like you said, like a few times we spoke in like whatever classes we were in, but we weren't really like friends. Like
Hmm.
we were just kind of classmates that spoke to each other here and there.
And thus began the rivalry.
Yeah, and you know what? Truth be told, I don't know what kind of start. I don't recall. I'm not, claiming, I was in the right or I really just don't remember. But at one point, I remember Joe being like, "Hey, why don't you come be involved?" And I remember going out one Saturday and kind of having a general idea where you guys were doing it and like full on quote unquote wrestling gearish kind of like track pants and I forget what t-shirt I was wearing, but I was like, and I was just driving around on my bike aimlessly looking for a yard, and I eventually just kind of came home because I couldn't find it. But I don't know what started the tension between what would be kind of my company and your company.
Yes, our companies. I was very original and just decided to call us WWF. And I remember there was one summer where like everyone was kind of like, there's girls kind of want to like finger a girl, like I kind of do things, and like I'd come up with this elaborate lie that I'd spoken to Paul Heyman from ECW. I came up, and this is how I knew I was a great storyteller, and that's why I'm sticking with it, because I come up with this like elaborate, like it sounds bad to call it a lie, but it was a full blown lie. Basically, Paul Heyman giving me the speech that if they weren't good enough to be in my backyard wrestling thing, then they were crappy friends. And I don't know why anyone bought it, but like all of them were like, "Yeah, Paul Heyman's got a point. We should stick by Eddie." And that's a true story. Like if you go to Sean Springett hated me for like a year. It was seventh grade, hated me because he bought it. And it's like not something I was in seventh grade for fuck's sake. Like it was more or less like we had finally. It was almost like The Sandlot. Like I remember Jason's like he's a video guy. Like he loves film, and I'm the same way. He's toyed with the idea of wanting to write a movie that kind of like deals with kids growing up doing backyard wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
If I had any input, I'd say make it like The Sandlot because that's what it felt like. It was just a bunch of oh god. Because I had friends that later on went on to become scumbags because they kind of grew into themselves. And they became muscular and good looking, and at the time they were fat and just out of shape and covered in acne, and nobody wanted to date us. Like, we'd go to these school dances. I remember me and this one kid used to do the Night at the Roxbury routine. And we'd find the hottest girl at the dance, and we'd just get her in between us and do the whole bumping chest thing to her. Because in our minds, as losers, we thought that was hysterical. But really, it was like we'd go to these things, and we'd hide, like wallflowers, we'd like hide in the coat room or something, and like, we'd be trading wrestling tapes, or we'd be talking about, we'd make each other mixtapes or whatever. We'd just be talking about anything other than hormones. So it kind of reached that point where it was like, I don't know, like all the misfits kind of had, or in this case, 2 backyards to like hang out in.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that was heartbreaking about wrestling, was when, I know for me, I got out of it 8th grade because, for 2 reasons. I was finally like kind of like interested in girls, and I accidentally discovered drugs. So I was just kind of like, oh, the 2 things that are amazing in life, vaginas and being messed up. Yes. And that, I think, was the last time I'd ever experienced backyard wrestling. Was essentially, I was kind of like the Sasquatch of my neighborhood at that point, or even like the Howard Hughes, because like I just disappeared into this like enigmatic drug world. Like, but really, I was just like smoking pot and popping pills in my basement bedroom, listening to Nirvana or, The Who or something, and just not caring and smoking cigarettes and whatever. And then I think, so to speak, I kind of came out of my hole for like a day. I discovered this thing called sunlight, and that I didn't have enough of it. And I went to walk to the woods I went to go smoke a cigarette or something, because I was still like hiding it from my parents. I was with my friend Allison. We just happened to walk by my good buddy Nick's yard, and Jason had basically essentially recruited all the guys that I used to have. And all of my old guys kind of looked at me and they're like, holy crap. Like, last time we saw Eddie, he had spiky hair and, was wearing DX shirts. He's wearing a Kurt Cobain shirt. His hair's really long. Like, what happened to him? So for some reason, I think they blamed Jason for that. Because I remember they got really defensive. This one kid like attaching fireworks to your entryway, and no lie, Sean was wrestling his older brother Gary, and they, with all due respect, Sean, they were kind of temperamental guys. So, and this kid knew this, so he fired a firework at him, and it cracked right against this kid's hand.
Mm-hmm.
He runs off mid-matches, chasing this other kid around the neighborhood, and I think I like went to make small talk with Danny Powers, and he took a broom. Literally a broom, and started like swatting me. And that then led to 2 of my other guys basically destroying Jason's entryway. Meanwhile, all I wanted to do was say hello before I went up to the woods to smoke a cigarette and maybe some pot.
Now, to me, that's the end of the road for backyard wrestling for me. But if I can jump back to the early genesis of what I think got the tension started, was I remember at one point going over to Danny Powers' house, and I know you guys had a website. I know you guys like were making Titantrons and everything like that.
Yeah.
And I think you were there, and I just think it became like, I don't know if you were busy or whatever, but I got like a cold shoulder from you. It probably was unintentional, just like, hey, that's Jason. But in my mind, I was like, I'm the wrestling guy. You should want to talk to me. You know what I mean? Where it was just like, we could work together, and you could have been, a bad day, whatever. But I just remember being like, oh, you don't want to talk to me. Like, okay, fine. That, I think, kind of got the genesis started for me being like, well, whatever, I can do something. And that's
here's the crappy part about hearing this. To this day, I'm still the moody guy. Even at my job, like I've joked to one of my coworkers, been like, how come customers don't love me as much as they love you guys? It's so hard to reach you, Eddie. In reality, like I could sit in a room not talking, and just because I'm naturally quiet, and someone's like, hey, what's up? And I'll like kind of nod at them. And immediately, and I know, because I'm the type of guy, I'll text somebody or I'll message somebody like, hey, what's up? And I'll get high, and immediately I do the teenage girl thing of, they're mad at me, and I don't know why. Apparently, I give off the same effect when I just kind of like, I'll, do the thing with like my fist under my chin. I'll just be like zoning out. And I could be thinking about anything. I could be thinking about a sandwich. I could be thinking about what website I'm going to go on, like very methodically. Like, do I want to go on Reddit, or do I want to go? And someone will walk by like, hey, what's up? And I'll just kind of nod at them. Like I'll like the pimp nod, like the Han Solo nod. Like it comes across like I'm better than you, when really it's just like, oh, hey, I don't know where I am right now.
No.
So, but the funny thing is that rivalry lasted until well after high school.
Oh yeah, but let me jump and tell the the history of the EWF promotion that myself and Timmy Howe got started. Let's see. I think we went through that whole summer. So it was discussed in April that we do something, and then like through people, like through Joe Maloney, it was like, hey, you should come in. And I don't know if you ever spoke to Joe about me coming in, but it was just that, and it never materialized. And then, we went through the whole summer, and I think me and Timmy like watched Beyond the Mat or something like that, and was just like, hey, let's fuck around. And then he had a camera.
Yeah.
Like he had the shittiest fucking camera in the world. It was black and white, and it only worked if you attached it to a VCR. It was like a Fisher Price style camera, but out in his like front yard with the camera poking out through the window. Like just one day we were like, hey, let's just fuck around and, wrestle out in your front yard. And he had like, those like folding beds, like not beds, but like the kiddie couch that would like fold out into the bed.
Yeah.
We had that, and that was our mat. And then we found like an old like painting ladder, and we just fucked around, and we were like, this is fucking awesome. That was the end of the summer. Beginning of like school, it was like, hey, let's think about doing something like a wrestling thing. And my goal was like, okay, I'm gonna be better than Eddie's. Well, you guys didn't have a ring. Like you just fucked around like around a poolside or wherever, and I was just like, okay, step one, we have to build a ring. So I don't know how we managed to find the supplies, and it was fucking.
What Jason's leaving out was it was a death trap.
Oh God.
I walked by this kid Anthony's house where, again, like I did with certain friends, Jason and Timmy, Anthony was more awkward than any of us, which is really saying something. Sweetest guy you'll ever meet.
Absolutely.
Obsessed with Michael Jackson, which right off the bat stigmatized the poor guy.
Yeah.
To the point where like he was getting haircuts, and I remember and this was well into high school, and a bunch of buddies and I, like at this point, we're all like stoners or whatever. We're walking by, and we see Anthony proudly like running around. He's got a mullet, like a full-on mullet.
Yep.
And he comes up and he's so proud, and he shows me the picture that he brought to the hairdresser that I had, because my mom decided that I needed frosted tips with my spiky hair. And he shows me the picture from Michael Jackson's Bad, and this kid we used to call TGB just starts bursting out laughing and was like, Anthony, my friend, you are the proud owner of a mullet. And Anthony was so just good-natured, like he just laughed it off, like, all right, guys. And he just took off. I remember just holding my head in my hands thinking like, because I can relate, because I did the whole, like, Anthony and I were on par with hero worship. Like, Anthony to this day, lives and dies for Michael Jackson. I was a Kurt Cobain guy. Like, I was full-on hair past my shoulders, ripped jeans, Freddy Krueger sweater, like, flannel shirts, thermal underwear, the whole 9 yards. So, like, I'm like, I know what I've gone through as, like, the creepy Kurt Cobain. I can only imagine, because my hero killed himself. Anthony's hero was going through sexual abuse like scandals, and he's wearing a mullet based off this guy. So and I was a huge Michael Jackson fan, and so essentially they had kind of like tricked this kid into thinking like, we got to do this in your yard.
Exactly. If you know the kid, if you're hearing this, you can get the sense of his background and what the rules were that applied to him in his life growing up. Yeah, we had pretty much free reign of his backyard. So it was like, all right, well, this is the arena. Next step was building the ring, and
it was a death trap.
No, it was death trap. But all right, I'll go through the construction of the ring. First, we found at Timmy's grandmother's house like a fucking stash load of plywood, like probably a good $500 worth of like plywood sheets. So that became the base, and then there was also like 2x4s. So we made the foundation of the ring. Next, we used PVC pipes for the ring posts. And here's my fucking genius way of doing it, of measuring. I didn't use a measuring tape or anything like that. I was like, well, what do wrestlers use? How high is it on a wrestler? Oh, it's about, upper chest height. Okay, I'll do that for me. Not realizing that I'm the fucking shortest one in the whole fucking group.
Oh my, yeah.
So I don't know, what was I at that time?
God, I mean, I'm
5'8", 5'9". I mean,
think
not 5'8", 4'8", 4'9", 5 feet maybe.
You're being a little exaggerated.
Okay.
Oh, I can't.
But I was a pretty fucking short kid. Timmy's way taller than me. Anthony's close to my height, but To me, it comes up, I could, walk over to the post and, it's up to my top shoulder. To Timmy, it probably came up to his like belly button.
Yeah.
So it already fucking looked, and it's droopy ropes because they don't hang right. They're not taut like, with cables or anything like that. Funny enough, that fall I had moved into my grandparents' house, which was right in the middle of like where Timmy and Anthony both lived. So my parents were like renovating my grandparents' old house, pulling out like nasty fucking carpet and fucking carpet padding, and I'm like, ooh, fucking mats. So we took that, laid that down, and then Timmy's parents had just pulled out a like a chain link fence around their yard, but it was all in like, I don't know, 8 by, I don't know, 2 like lengths or whatever, or 8 by 3 lengths. So there was like 3 of them, so it was enough to make both ups and a top. So we had like an almost ECW style entranceway.
Which I will say, the coolest aspect of Jason's back at wrestling was the entryway.
Yeah.
The thing with the ring, though, was the imagination. Conceptually, I knew what they were doing. My only experience, my only time in this ring, and Jason hated me this day, was I'd kind of come around to the idea of like, all right, let's merge. And this kid, Mike Welch, who I love him dearly, a gigantic pain in the fucking ass
Yep.
kids. He decided he wanted to wrestle me. Now, we're both, I was like 90 pounds. Like, if Jason was the shortest guy in his group, I was the skinniest. And it was very squirrely, like, God, I don't even know how to describe it. I was like Mr. Burns meets E.T. Like, I was just really awkward and skinny. And I remember they had this like platform thing, almost like Sin Cara, where like you'd run and you jump off and you
we found in the trash a like a aerobics trampoline.
Well, I jumped off this trampoline and with my bony knee nailed this kid right between the eyes. He was out like a fucking light. And I look over and Mike Welch had essentially told me that this was going to be like my audition. And I just kind of sit up and I'm holding Mike's head like, I'm so sorry. I look up and I just see Jason with his arms folded shaking his head at me. And I just kind of took that as like, oh man, you're going to kill somebody. Get out. You know what? I'm going to leave now.
See, I don't remember me watching that, but I will say that probably Welch had a very good part in continuing the feud between myself and you. Because I kind of looked at you guys as like a package deal of like coming in.
Well, the funny thing is, again, I love this man dearly. He was one of those guys that like he would go to me and be like, Jason just said this about you, and then run to Jason and say that. Meanwhile, like he'd tell me something Jason said, I'm like, okay, and then he'd run and like fabricate because he was trying to start his own thing with this kid Matt Stockbridge.
Yep.
And I remember this even happened like later on in 8th grade. So 7th grade was wrestling, for 8th grade was me and forming bands. So like I was trying to start a band with my buddy Sean, and this kid once again, Mike Welch pops up, and he was like trying to steal band members from me. So if you're a female, and there aren't many of you who listen to the show, if you're female and you're listening to this, you're like, oh, it finally makes sense now. If you're a guy listening to this and you're kind of just nodding your head, being like, yep, don't know why we did that. Everything was like a pissing match.
Yeah.
Everything essentially boiled down to my dick's bigger than yours, and whatever I do is cooler than yours.
But going back into more of Welch continuing to add fuel to the fire. Let's see, we had Pat. Pat Ward.
Oh my God, I love him too, but that asshole. You know those tiki torches that you keep. He came to my show with Sean's older brother, and he was in a treehouse that Danny Powers had in his yard. And he thought, in his stroke of brilliance, to throw that from the treehouse. And my, like, sort of, like, just really bad, awkward luck, I happened to just be standing right in the direct line of fire and took a tiki torch right between the eyes. And literally, like, was sitting in the bathroom pouring blood out of my head. And it looked like the worst, like, going back to Fangoria magazine, it looked like the goriest shot of like an 80s or 70s like exploitation film. Meanwhile, people like I locked and shut Danny Powell's bathroom door. and my buddy Brian was slipping Advils under the crack of the door with little notes being like, "Are you okay, buddy?" That's Pat Ward.
Yeah, that's Pat Ward. But I had a pretty decent relationship with Pat. I never had a problem, and I kind of looked at him as like my muscle, if I can say, if that makes sense. Like he was the tough kid, like you know what I mean. Like I wouldn't like fuck with it. Like he goes to the Vogue and he does.
You've just discredited yourself with that one statement alone.
What do you mean?
Here's the popular misconception if you're not from Massachusetts. The Vogue is shortened for vocational school. This is where like your future plumbers, hairdressers, electricians, etc. go. Unlike public schools, they're very it's a melting pot of all different kinds of races and cultures. Yeah. If you were a white kid from suburbia, the idea that you had more than one black kid in your school made you feel like you were going to school in Compton. And of course, people would perpetuate the myth that like fights break out, people bring weapons and knives, and oh my God, you know, somebody got shanked there with a pencil. It was a number 2, to believe it or not. And meanwhile, I had friends that went there that were like, yeah, it was like any other school. Like essentially the Vogue was for people just as awkward, if not more awkward than Jason and I.
Yeah. Or
were on more drugs than I was. And like literally it was like if they went to a public school, there was no chance for them because that's how public education works.
True.
But the guys like Jason and I was like, oh my God, he goes to the Vogue. Was the equivalent of like saying that
he went to juvenile prison.
Yeah, this guy lived in Inglewood and he went to juvie and he's gonna be my muscle now.
Well, the thing that gave credit to that, I have a brother who went to the Vogue and everything like that, and he's a no take shits kind of guy. So I was just like, oh, he's like my brother, but he's my age. And he's friends with me. So he's my guy. And, you know, me and, you know, we had done a long like program where I had just given him the title. I was the champion and I was like, you know what? He can be the champion. He'll be better as the champion than I am.
Yeah.
Fast forward a couple days later, we're doing another show. Welch is there. I'm not sure if you're there or not. Something happened like at my house and I had to go. And not only I didn't have to go back to my house, I had to go to like Woburn to my sister's house or whatever. During the middle of a show, I was pissed. I was like, all right, well, fuck it. Somehow in this time, Welch had convinced or told Timmy that we're going to put the belt on Welch.
Yeah, that was typical Welch behavior, actually.
And Timmy went along with it, agreed, or believed his story. One of the 3, you know, outcomes or whatever. But that's how, and that just Genesis. And I found out. I remember calling up Anthony's house and being like, "Hey, what's going on?" Oh, Welch just won the title, and I was like, "What?" Like you know, Timmy and I were quote unquote owners of it, but I kind of felt like I had the creative lead on everything, and just the fact that this is what happened, and it pissed me off, like, and I was just like, that's it, fucking Eddie and Welch are out.
Now here's the funny thing, I had a similar incident happen in mine where I had a best friend at the time and I was like, all right man, I got 50%, you got 50%. Again, mind you, we're in 7th grade and this is very real to us. His older brother never liked me. I mean, this is like, it sounds like ridiculous and stereotypical, but first time I met his older brother, he literally, because I was so skinny, picked me up by like, and I wore tighty whities at the time, literally picked me up by the strap of my underwear and just held me in the air, like I was a trophy or like a trout or something that like a fish he just caught. And would just, like, I'm suspended in air, like arms and legs dangling like a cartoon, and just held me there to show like what he could do to me to all of our friends. He had decided that he wanted to take over the company with my friend, and I gave this kid 50%. So what happened? They divided both their halves into 25%. So it was his 25 and the other guy's 25 against my 50. And again, Welch was another story because during our last thing, he came in and tried to pull the same crap. Like my would-be brother-in-law had this really insane match with the actual wrestler, my neighbor, him against the kid's older brother and his best friend. The kid's older brother kind of like lifted his best friend over his shoulders, like he flipped him up in the air. Well, he landed on my would-be brother-in-law's arm and shattered it. So he was rushed off because he had to go see a doctor. And Welch was like, Eddie, you should really go with him. What I didn't know was that was, well, essentially, if I left, was going to pull the same shit. Like, all right, guys, here's the deal.
The Stoneham screw jobs.
Exactly. So that's the thing that was kind of funny is Jason and I were so naive, I think is the perfect word. And that kind of carried over into our adult lives, unfortunately, especially with jobs, because, and that's it, I don't want to focus too much on like where we were in grade school, because as we got older, Jason and I both, we had goals, and essentially we accomplished those goals for me in radio and for you in television. And we both reached a mutual point in, I believe it was 2009, 2010, where we were so depressed and miserable with ourselves. And I believe that was like the first time you had messaged me in the longest time, was like you started asking me about radio, about TV. But it was every Monday night. And, you know, consequently, we'd both be watching Monday Night Raw from wherever we were. And that was kind of what got the wheels in motion for the show.
Yeah.
It was during a Monday Night Raw, and like, I remember kind of like Monday night, there was two things I could count on: Monday Night Raw and Jason messaging me. To the point where if I didn't get a message on a Monday from Jason, I would get kind of like sad. Like, why didn't you message me tonight? Because essentially Jason was the only person I talked to when I was working radio. Because at that point, I'd just gotten out of like a really bad breakup. Incidentally, the older brother there who split the 15 to 25. Well, I'll share this story with you. My ex-girlfriend was his girlfriend. Essentially what happened was she liked me, he was an asshole, she cheated on him with me, and then cheated on me with him. She is now the mother of his child and married to him. Fun facts. So at the time I was kind of going through that, and I wasn't really talking about it. The only one I really talked to consistently was you.
Yeah.
And that was when you started talking about Mark's comment, and we would joke about, you know, backyard wrestling and what you did and what I did. Because again, we never really had like a human conversation. You know what I mean? Like, it was something that, like, we never sat down and, like, had, like, a real conversation over drinks or something. I believe the first shooting of our company, that was, like, the real human interaction you and I had.
Yeah. Which was awkward at first. Like, I remember telling you, like, oh, I just went and had a nip in the parking lot because I'm nervous.
Well, you were always, that was the thing, I kind of laughed at. Like, Jason was always kind of a nervous guy. I am a nervous guy by nature, but I think because of the nature of radio, I kind of grew out of it a little bit. The difference between what Jason is, what I does is like, I've encountered this with a lot of video people, is video people is still kind of like shy by nature because they almost get away with it. In radio, you can't be like, there's no room for like coyness at all.
Yeah.
And I learned that pretty quickly. You had to be really assertive really fast or you were not going anywhere. And that's not even saying the people that could assert themselves were going places. So Jason would come up with an idea, and anytime he came up with an idea, I'd be like, fuck yeah, I'll totally do it. Very not me at the time. I remember that first night, I was a little nervous, but I was like, it was that anxious, and I'm getting that feeling now talking about, I was really like driving to Saugus, and I'm like, I'm actually really excited right now. This could be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Because the cool thing about it was, where the studio was located was it was hidden. Like, it was like, I don't know how to describe it, but like, it was cool that it was so mysterious because nobody knew what we were doing. We could have been shooting softcore porn in there.
Which happened at one point, I guess.
Didn't know that, but good to know. But like, it was just cool because Jason and I were at very different but similar points in our lives. Jason, unlike me, I was living at home, didn't have a girlfriend. I show up, and like the first words I Jason about, again, we've never interacted before. Hey, can I tell you something, man? And that's when he proceeds to tell me all about his engagement or future engagement to his now fiance.
Was I that forthcoming with it?
You were, actually. It was funny because I literally walked out. I was in for like all of 5 minutes, and like you were telling me about WrestleMania, and you're like, hey, like I haven't told anyone this, and you start talking to me about it. And I'm like, and that was really what warmed me up to doing the show with you, because I'm like, that was my big thing, was like, hey, here's a guy that loves wrestling. I love it, but not as much as him, and I don't really know how's this chemistry thing gonna work. And not to say it was like methodical on your end, but the second I walked in, you're like, oh, hey, I'm getting married, and I was kind of like, well, fuck you. Once again, it's sixth grade, the kid with dandruff. And girlfriend is, living at home with his parents with the guy that lives with his now future fiance. And the first show, I remember it was just really, and it's only hard to talk about the show because we did that show on a Thursday. During that week, before I did the show, my dad was having problems swallowing. Yeah. And essentially what happened was he was eating something and he started choking, and he was all by himself. There was no one there to help him. And he was like choking violently, and he was like trying to like he was gonna die because he couldn't, you know. So he essentially ran into. He was gonna run across the hall to see if the neighbor would help him, but he essentially popped it out himself. And we were just like, oh, well, Dad's always had bad acid reflux because he was a heavy drinker. So I go into the thing with Jason, I hear that, and of course, Jason and I are like, you know, all excited because we're the only two guys we know that are still watching professional wrestling. Again, we chatted for a while about it. So we do the first show. I remember that weekend, it was that Saturday, it was that Sunday was my twin nephews were having a christening, and I was like DJing the party. I was, you know, making a list with my niece and whatever. And that Saturday night, Jason put Marks and Commentary on YouTube, and I was playing it in my living room so my mother could see it. My dad kind of like shoved her out of the way. I was like, I want to watch this. And he sat down, he watched it. I've never seen the man seem more impressed by anything I've ever done in my life. And it was just a YouTube thing that you and I were doing.
Yeah.
He was like really like beaming with pride. Like, this looks so good. Like, you guys. And he was another one. And I've showed it to a lot of people later that week who were like, I have no idea what the fuck you guys are talking about, but that's awesome. Because you sound like you know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, I was excited because I'm like, oh, this could go somewhere. And I'm like, I wasn't deterred by, like, the lack of Facebook views. Because I was like, whatever, we're having fun. Because it was a lot of fun doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what were your thoughts initially when we sat down, we hit record? 'Cause I know you were really fucking nervous. Like, really, really nervous doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it was a long time coming for me to get to that point of doing stuff. Like as you mentioned, you know, I had worked in television. I had worked actually for the Red Sox, like, and just kind of wore myself out to, like, you know, you get to that point where it's like, hey, I reached a dream. It's not what I thought it was. And it just kind of fades away. And I'm respectful of the opportunity that I was given and everything like that. But at a certain point, I'm like, this isn't cutting it for me financially. And, you know, people got opportunities that I didn't get, that I kind of felt like I should have gotten first, but
Right.
but who knows in the grand scheme of things. I also, at a certain point, I just kind of soured on the whole opportunity too, and just kind of slowly distanced myself over the next couple months of like, yeah, I don't know if I really want to do this anymore. So, you know, I tried finding another job and everything like that, looking all around. And I, like you mentioned, I had hit you up at one point because I don't know if you recall or not, but at one point you were a Facebook friend of mine, and then you weren't, and then you were again. It was just, you know, I go through the thing of like, who am I talking to? Who am I not talking to? And I was just like, well, there's Eddie. I never talked to him. And at a certain point, I don't know if I was on Indeed or whatever. I don't know if you have one of those accounts or whatever.
I do.
Okay, that's what did it. And I saw a job for the street team for Entercom, which runs, what is it, WEI and WAF, and I think there's a few smaller stations connected to that too, right?
Used to be Mike FM. I didn't touch on this much, but it's not like I'm slandering them. I started working for WFNX, which is now, it's gone. It was a heritage station. It's now gone. I got an email from the then, what was it, assistant program director, this guy, Mike Morgan, amazing fucking guy. I love this guy. And was basically, there was a guy at CSB that was vouching for my advisor, and he was like, hey, this guy, Mike Morgan, wants to get in touch with you. Like, I've told him all about you. They created essentially an internship out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. And I think you'd be a perfect candidate. Get the hell out of FNX because you're not going anywhere, and do this. And I was with FNX for only 3 months, and I was like, okay, I'll jump ship. I went there, and essentially what I did was I was kind of like a producer for the drive time personality, Mistress Carey, who, if you're from this area, everybody knows her. I don't quite know how to describe her, but she's a phenomenal DJ and like one of the coolest women you'll ever meet. And I was working for her, and I was working for the station Mike FM. Mike FM abruptly went under, and they were focused more on EEI and AF. And Jason reached out to me. I was basically asking me about the company, like, should I apply for this job? And I essentially told him, like, why not? It doesn't hurt. But I was making $10 an hour, working, 4 hours a shift, 5 hours a shift, except for when somebody didn't show up and I got stuck there for like 16 hours, or I was over or whatever. And that was kind of like what Jason was going through, is what I was going through, was that's the nature of the beast. Like, I got really apathetic about radio for a while, but that's just the nature of the beast. And I'm sure with Jason, the Red Sox and what have we realized what it was that we thought we wanted to do, and then kind of realized, well, you can't start a family or really support yourself or move out of home when you're making this kind of money.
Exactly. But yeah, that's kind of where my story picks up. And if I remember, you were like, yeah, go ahead and apply, but this is probably what it's like. And thankfully, you know, kind of turned me off to even wanting to go for the interview. So I ended up getting a job elsewhere. But yeah, it was that time where I was just like, I need to find something else. And, you know, that I think opened up the line of communication between us where I was just like, fuck it, let me ask Eddie. I know he works there. Like, we had no prior real conversations before that, as we'd mentioned, but I was just like, let me shoot it out. And I felt so awkward asking you too.
Well, as I told Jason, I had so many people who I never talked to throughout high school that, you know, obviously it was Facebook. The on and off thing Jason was talking about was I had a Facebook account, didn't want it, never wanted to be a part of this thing because I just said it's not going to benefit me in any way. Like, because I was the guy, again, I was the creepy Kurt Cobain guy. Like, why do I want to be like a presence with all these people? So I deleted it. And then that guy, Mike Morgan, was like, no, you should really recreate a Facebook account because it's good for networking. So I did it, and I friended essentially everybody who was either working in radio, in audio production, whatever, in the area. And when Jason asked me, I was pretty curt. I was pretty upfront. And because in a short time, I learned in a short time, thankfully, under the tutelage of a lot of veterans and experienced radio personalities, really what the business had to offer. Yeah. And it was really about endurance, but it comes at a cost. What I learned when I used to bitch about radio was their bottom line, but really it was an invaluable lesson because at the end of the day, you have to question your bottom line. What do you want out of this life? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of people I still communicate with that are still in the business, that are still kind of going through the motion, the ebbs and flows of what that entails. And I remember Jason, and again, we were grown men at this point, and I would get inundated with messages from people I didn't even like or didn't even talk to. I was just Facebook friends with being like, you know, how do I get a morning show? How do I get famous? Like, Eddie, get me famous. Meanwhile, I'm making $10 an hour, no benefits, not that I'm working 2 jobs, and thinking like, go fuck yourself. When Jason sent me the message, it didn't come from like, I want to have a morning show and be really it was just genuinely like, how do I make it an extra buck?
Yeah. Or what is it like? Am I going to hate this job?
Right.
You know, coming in, is it going to be worth it? You know?
So my philosophy at that point was if you tell someone no and they show up anyway, that means that, you know what, I appreciate your advice, but I want to do this anyway. But it wasn't like, I think a lot of people, even with podcasting, when a lot of people would, again, when Eddie and Cammy was a podcast, people would message me all the time, like, how do I start a podcast? What do I do? It costs you nothing, but essentially, Jason can vouch now, because I haven't been in the producer role for a while, just because I'm not super technologically like savvy in the engineering sense. It's very taxing. And it's a labor of love. Unless you really love doing it, there's no sense in it, because we don't make any money off this. I believe we made like $20-something, $40-something off those t-shirts, and that essentially Jason and I are shirts. Yeah. And that's the thing with podcasting is, or anything really in this life, is you really have to love what you do. You have to be passionate about it. And maybe for Jason, but for me, it was sitting, you know, and I was in this AAF was a heritage station. It's you watch Pauly Shore's Dead, and I still mark out, if you will, when I see like the AAF's like shirts on actors in the movie. It was a big deal, and I went from listening to Mr. Scary in 4th grade to meeting them. And I even told her the story of how I listened to her on New Year's Eve with my buddy Turk, and she was like, Eddie, I'm going to tell you one piece of advice: never age a woman. She was really young in those days, and obviously she's much older, but it was just exciting to be like, oh my God, I used to listen to you all the time, and now I'm here and I work for you. Yeah. But Jason and I were in that mutual place where obviously he had a girlfriend he was living with. He needed to make some more money. I was just, I want to buy a car and I want to move out, because I didn't buy my first car till I was 25. Yeah. And obviously now I have a fiance and I live with her, but I didn't move out of my house until this past November. Mm-hmm. So it was one of those situations. It definitely opened the lines of communication, because for once I could actually relate to someone. It wasn't like, to this day, I've always had the issue, or not so much anymore, but used to have the issue. You sign on Facebook, and here you are in your little microcosm of the world, and here's everybody else. And I was never like really putting much into the fact that people, like any other facet of media, are going to make their situation look better than everyone else's just because they can manipulate it that way. Mm-hmm. I was the opposite. I was sitting with a bottle of bourbon across my computer screen, drinking and feeling sorry for myself, because how come they get everything I want? I'm working so goddamn hard. And for me, when the proposition was made, like, do you want to do the show? It was an escape, because like when I used to do it with Cammy, it was fun because we talked about a lot of the show was essentially like at the time me trying to get a girlfriend, like about the more humiliating aspects of my life. But we would also poke fun at like the Charlie Sheen thing and whatever. And we had an awesome story where we had actually convinced at least 20 people that J-Bo had been kidnapped by Charlie Sheen. Why? A girl who knew J-Bo personally wanted to call the cops because she thought Charlie Sheen actually kidnapped him. So Jason and I have been talking about this for a while. And I remember I was kind of getting like aggravated because I was like, why is he dragging his feet? What are we waiting for? But the timing actually worked out really perfectly in a way.
Yeah.
Because when it finally came to fruition, I felt like I wasn't shy and apathetic, and Jason was still kind of shy, but was more determined. And like, I remember the first conversation we had outside the parking lot was, I don't care if this show makes any money. And there were two things. I joked about the whole Kowloon thing long before Catherine was on the show. And you had said, like, I'd love to do a show from Kowloon, and I would love to make a little bit of money with the logo I created.
Yeah. But that's not the end goal.
Right. But it was still kind of like, we were so proud of like our mascot, like that fucking monitor with the sunglasses in the mouth. Like when Jason was showing me all this stuff, I was floored by how slick and amazing it looked. And I remember for me by show 2, because again, this was February of last year. By show 2, the day of actually where we were meant to shoot, I remember my boss was like, she's always been a cheerleader. She thought it was so funny because she'd find things in the thrift store and be like, oh my God, Eddie, it's fate. She found an old WWF magazine with Jake the Snake on the cover. And it was just hours before I was going to record with you. So she was like, you should keep doing this. So around 5 o'clock, I went outside because I didn't get any word on my dad's condition. I had found out that he had been diagnosed with cancer like an hour or two before we shot our second show. And unlike Jason, I kind of walked in the studio very proudly, showed the magazine, very curtly told him what was going on with my dad, and was just like, no, we got to keep doing the show. And for me, that's what made the show cathartic in a way, because it was that escape. It provided that, Jason and I, when we would do the show, we'd be at our jobs all day. We'd be, trying to make whatever money we could. And then for like 30 minutes, because at the time it was a 30-minute show, for 30 minutes, we didn't have to think about anything other than wrestling. That was the only thing we had to have figured out, is where we stood on the product. And we didn't make a very conscious decision to make it very WWE specific. I mean, and again, it's supposed to be like an hour and a half show, but I don't even know where we're at right now. But it was more or less like we were cognizant of TNA, but we didn't really care.
Yeah.
We wanted to be honest about where we stood, and we were WWE fans. And from that point on, it was essentially, and it was never meant to be a podcast, even though I joke with people, I'm like, I think that was Jason's plan all along, was make it a podcast. When it became a podcast, it was essentially because Jason had transitioned from one studio to another job. And like anyone at a new job, he didn't want to ask for favors right away.
Yeah.
So what was the easier way? At the time, I had a working computer that was still compatible with all the software shit I had. So I'm like, all right, well, I'll be the producer. We'll do it a podcast.
Yeah. Which explains actually episode 4 of Marks on Commentary, which we did in my living room. That I hate the episode, but it was the only means we could do the pre-WrestleMania like show, essentially. Like I had a shitty, out of date like mini DV camera, and I was just like, I guess this is it. Like I had no resources beyond that point at that time.
Now I feel like, not to like rush the origin of the show, if you will, but to kind of get people through like the ups and downs, so to speak. I went to school with Catherine. She was a journalism major. I was a writing major. And again, she was like me, very awkward and shy and fidgety. And she had her geeky thing she was into. And I remember thinking like, hell, what the hell? I do the show with my buddy Jason. Let's do the show. And so she started co-hosting with us. And that was probably May or June. And then around August, it was a weird time because we were all trying to think of ways to make the show work. And that was when I started to get really over fucking whelmed, because my dad had just come out of surgery, but he wasn't the same guy. He didn't come back the same guy as the guy he went in as. And around that time, I was like really adamant. I'm like, I gotta find my soulmate. And I went on this whole thing, I'm a book about it, whatever. But around that time, I just kind of, I don't know, like I couldn't keep up with everything anymore. And unfortunately, like a lot of things suffered, namely my relationship with Catherine. And around August of that year, that was when I met Nina. We were all kind of like, where are we going with this? Like, what's the end goal here?
Mhm.
And for Jason and I, it was always essentially just to have an outlet one day a week where it's like, you don't have to worry about jobs, responsibilities, fiancés, whatever. It was just like an hour and a half where two people could just kind of talk about, even if they're not talking about, which is what happened on our last show. Like, we kind of went into a rant about movies, whatever. Like, and Jason and I had brought this up, and yes, we did shoot the rest of the WrestleMania. And I'm only bringing this up because I joked to Jason. I'm like, I like being a presence on the show. Somebody tweeted like, I want to address the elephant in the room. Where's Eddie? Essentially, what happened was Jason and I, we have different schedules, and we found a night. We're like, we're gonna crank these out, and they were amazing, and I was so proud of them. I don't know what happened, but we lost the audio.
Yeah, it was an audio issue.
It was an audio issue, so they didn't get to make it to the final cut, but. I don't even know. Like, we just liked having that outlet, I guess, of just being able to reach out to people and just kind of do our thing. And mostly it was for us. We never planned to monetize on it. We were just kind of like, if it became something great, if it doesn't, it's whatever.
Mm-hmm.
What we discussed that night, though, was we remember the wrestling shows when we grew up on public access with the two dudes, really awkward, out of shape, just gross looking guys.
Yeah.
That work in sub shops and set up around the table. I remember, like, I went home after Jason and I had a conversation about this, and he was like, we're both 26, 27. Like, we're kind of figuring out, like, what if this doesn't work? What do we do from there? And it was kind of like not like, oh, we're on the verge of ending the show. It was more or less like, well, you could still have fun and do it, but it just becomes something else.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the thing, was when you do stuff like this, it's fun in the beginning, and then eventually reality kind of takes over. And if you're not making money on it, well, you know what I mean? Like, it is what it is. And that's kind of what happened with me and Cammie. We had never planned to become famous off of it. It was just something we were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And Catherine, unlike myself, is like adamant about wrestling, like really, really a super fan. And she would travel, and good on her. She, unlike myself and Jason, really wants a career in wrestling entertainment, if you will. The pressure of that for me at the time was so overwhelming. And then they were interviewing guests who I'd never heard of. And that was my thing with Jason, was in order to maintain the integrity of the show, I don't want to be sitting there with my thumb up my ass being like, who the fuck am I talking to?
Yeah.
So there was that like weird sabbatical stage for me. And then, we all kind of agreed, you guys do your thing. She was going to do her thing. So we started doing the show again in kind of the format that I always believed it was meant to be in. And again, once again, for me, it was like history repeating itself. My dad's health has declined. Like, he was given about a year to live. And, a part of me was kind of like, all right, well, things getting busy again, because Jason's on the verge of getting married. Now I'm on the verge of getting married. And, I go to school still, work full time. Jason works full time. But it felt more natural that way, though, to just keep doing the show the way we wanted to, because the thing with Catherine was, it was very, this could be a catalyst for all of us. And I remember just kind of looking at Jason and talking to Jason, being like, do we want that, though? Do we want it to be a catalyst for like a career?
But I think the thing that played into it was, like, we had been to the top of the mountain in, different fields and stuff like that. But still, like, we went to name brand organizations, and was just like, it's not as fun as you think. You know what I mean? And I think that kind of jaded us on the idea of, like, we're going to make this into a professional thing.
Well, I mean, because I've always been the believer in, I mentioned before, like, I'm actually in the middle of writing a book right now. Mm-hmm. And I always tell people, because they get excited, like, I'll tell them what the book's about, and they'll be like, oh, I think you have something on your hands there. Well, if I believe that, there's a very good chance I'll get jaded about it when it doesn't happen. If I'm doing it just for the love of it, and something happens, fantastic, but I'll never have expectations for it.
Yeah.
When I first went to that public access studio for the first show, there were no expectations. It was just kind of meant to be, bring your blazer, wear your Kelly Kapowski shirt, let's do this. And that's kind of what made it so cool. Like, for me, and again, I can't remember his name, and I feel so bad, but it was when I did the suicide prevention walk, and I got that $45 donation from a listener. and how honest he was about why he was giving me that money. Again, someone I've never met, lives in the fucking, lives in Australia. I just thought, wow, that's so cool, because that was something I'd never experienced in podcasting before, was, wow, people are actually listening. Or maybe it was just Twitter, because I've never used Twitter prior to the show. I've never used Twitter, and I still don't. Like, I pop on Monday nights, but it was like, putting something out there and someone being like, yeah, absolutely, I support this. And again, I had a bad night learning about my dad recently, and I did the whole hashtag Marks Against Cancer thing, and somebody was like, "No, I'm totally behind that." And it wasn't even meant to be like a thing we were doing for the show. It was just kind of like, you're drunk and sad, and blah, I write this. But that was what was cool about the show, was if the show was just strictly Jason and I talking, like no one's listening, like we're doing right now, and people respond to it, it's awesome, because you realize that people are listening because they want to listen. And you're not doing it because you want to make money. You're just kind of doing it because you're having fun. You like talking to your friend. And if other people like repeat a line from the show to you, it's so cool, because we just do this like nobody's listening. And when you find out people are listening, you almost kind of get nervous. Like, oh, I remember I had like a panic attack at Slammiversary this past year, because Jason was like, out of all the people here, some of them might be listeners of our show. And like I was like slouching in my seat, like, oh my God, really? And I freaked out, because I'm like, what if they are? What if like they want to punch us in the face, or what if like
big league us or whatever?
Yeah, exactly.
Cough, cough.
Yeah, cough.
That's all I'll say.
But no, I mean, I think for the most part, that's kind of where we've been going with this thing, is if we're doing the Marks Off commentary thing, a lot of it's just, and I've been doing a lot of talking, I apologize, but
no. Go for it. It's awesome.
For the most part, I never anticipated being 25 and finding out my 54-year-old dad could die, much less being 26, getting married, living with that person, and essentially realizing, oh, he's going to. So to be able to have that one day a week where you can kind of like, and that's not to say that I'm not appreciative of the guys or the athletes that have talked to you and Catherine, or even Catherine at all. It's just, for me, I never really wanted to feel like it was a job. Like the second it feels like it's a job and we're not getting money for it is the day I'm kind of like, you know what, it's not fun anymore. Because that's why people listen to shit like this, and that's why people do stuff like this, is because everybody's got their thing. You got mortgages, you got rent, you got fiancés, girlfriends, no girl, whatever it is, whatever hand you were dealt in life, you're playing that hand. So to be able to sit in a room at your house and Skype somebody for 30 minutes to an hour and get to meet people like Bob and, Curtis, and talk to them about something that you have a mutual shared love of is fucking awesome.
Yeah.
However, I'm not expecting, Titan Towers to be ringing my cell phone off the hook being like, we need you and Jason. That's delusional to me. If any day Vince McMahon were to call one of us, I guarantee we'd hang up on and be like, oh, fuck whoever that was. That's not the point, because the point has always been, like, we love and hate wrestling, or at least I do. Like, I go through periods where I really get excited about it, and you'll notice that's a good show, or the bad shows where Jason and I are kind of like, how are we going to get through an hour? Because that's, to me, I don't want to be told by somebody, well, you have to get through that hour and be really excited about it. Well, what if I'm not excited about it? What if it really sucked?
Yeah.
In my estimation of things, what if it really sucked? And that was what I liked about you saying, I want to do this wrestling show, but I want it to be genuinely us.
Yeah.
It's genuinely me. I'm a bipolar wrestling fan. Sometimes I love it. Sometimes I'm like, what the fuck? I'm 26. Why do I still watch this shit?
Yeah. I'm with you. And if I can jump into like my origin of why we're doing the show and what I originally intended for, was like, my idea for doing anything kind of, rolls back to like the YouTube kind of do it yourself thing. Like, I remember seeing like the Angry Video Game Nerd and being like, oh wow, like you can not be famous, but like have a community with, you know what I mean? And like having your own niche and having people support it. And that just kind of like captured my mind for a long time. And I was like, okay, well, he's doing this for like Nintendo games and video games and all this stuff. I'm like, nobody's doing that for wrestling. Like I don't know if I've told you this or not, but like I was originally thinking of doing like kind of like an Angry Video Game Nerd for wrestling fans. And I was going to call it like the Internet Wrestling Mark.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I was like, okay, what would this be? Who would that be? Be the guy in the basement? And the wheels were always turning to do something like that. It just I didn't have the means at the time financially to pull something like that off. You know, I didn't have money for a camera or anything like that, and but I was just still like, okay, there's something here. I want to do. What is it? How am I going to do it? And then, you know, a couple of years later, I saw like, you know, Epic Mealtime like doing their own thing, making, you know, logo like a T-shirt with their logo on it, and that kind of just kind of re-inspired me. Like, I want to do something, but I don't know what. How do we do it? And then I kind of found means through where I worked at the time, and then, you know, I was all this time like I'm a night owl, so it's like I just need stuff constantly feeding into my head, audio. You know, I listen to the Kevin Smith podcast, the Nerdist, and then you know I saw Eddie's making a podcast, and just for shits and giggles, it was like, hey, I'm going to listen to this, you know, and I found it was really funny. And I was just like, oh, cool. Like he does this thing. And then I just remember sitting on the idea of like, should I bring this to Eddie's attention or is he gonna like deflate it right as soon as I bring it up to him? Like, would you want to do something? Because I know you've had the conversation with different people that are like, hey, I want to be on that podcast too.
Well, again, not to interrupt your origin story, but you had mentioned kind of the whole do-it-yourself thing.
Yeah.
And that's the aspect about podcasting and YouTube videos that I always loved was essentially as a music fan, I appreciate like the punk rock. It's not like my thing, but the idea behind it was if the garage was your podcast, CBGB's was like your Podomatic. That's where the community was formed. Mm-hmm. And you would make this thing in your garage or your basement, whatever, and you take it to that one little club where like-minded people took it to. And I agree with you. It's a very do-it-yourself, like hit or miss. Like, you know, I know you're a big Jenna Marbles fan. And I mean, I don't get it personally, but, you know, I had a friend who went to her birthday in Boston, and it was like, why do you care? Like, she's a nobody. But that's because I'm not a fan. Like, I'm not kind of tuned into that. But it's amazing to see people like that are just one day that said, I'm going to do vlogs. I'm going to do video blogs or whatever.
Yeah.
And I know you and I are both, you know, big fans of that, where anyone can do it. And it's funny to get the reactions from people. You start doing something and immediately like, how do I do it like you? And you don't really have any stock in yourself. You're just like, dude, just fucking
do it.
Yeah, just do it.
Like, there's no trick. Just do it. Like,
and very similar was I'm like you. I'm a night owl. Like, if I'm not sitting on Facebook and writing, you know, blogs on Facebook or watching YouTube, I'm listening to podcasts or I'm listening to music and kind of thinking like, well, shit, if they could do it, why am I not doing this?
Yeah.
You know, and I that was, as you were saying, like, oh, I could have dismissed the idea, but that's what I loved about the idea was, you know, going back to the whole mutual fear of like becoming the public access guy with the wrestling toys on like the
goofy hat and.
Well, because for a lot of wrestling fans, we've joked about our interactions with wrestling fans. There's such a, I don't know, just an off-putting stigma of our wrestling fans produced by wrestling fans, where you get guys who are really well educated and like are just decent, quiet, but smart people out there who are terrified to talk about their appreciation of professional wrestling because they don't want to get lumped into like the lowest common denominator.
Yeah.
And I remember when you had told me the name of the show, I thought it was hysterical. And we've had people give us shit about it. Because they're like, you know what marks a derogatory thing? Yeah, asshole. Congratulations, you figured out Irish. I was more or less, when you said I want to call the show Mark's Commentary, I loved it. Because to me, it was like, oh, dude, that's like the funniest goddamn thing in the world. Because I'm not really a mark, neither are you. But
it won't be perceived as that regardless.
And we did, I won't say the name of the company because I don't want to get crapped on, and I do shop there, but Jason had even, and I've probably mentioned this on shows before, Jason had even called up or emailed this company and was like, hey, like, you know, you want to endorse us? Like, well, we'll totally plug your store. And they treated him like he had AIDS because he was a wrestling fan. They're like, yeah, we're not really into that, no thanks.
Yeah.
And I remember just kind of getting offended and thinking like, why not? I remember I told Jason on the show similar incidents where I was at a UPS and I was mailing the DVD that we gave to a contest winner. And the guy was like, oh, you do a podcast? It's awesome. Give me the link. And as I'm writing the link on paper, I'm like, yeah, it's a wrestling podcast. He takes the pen out of my hand, hands the paper back to me. He's like, "Yeah, I haven't watched wrestling since I was in middle school." And I'm like, dude, like, you're not going to get AIDS from listening to a show. Like, what's the big deal? It's professional wrestling. It's not what you think it is. But I think a lot of people have in their minds, like, the typical wrestling fan hosting a show about wrestling.
Yeah.
And me, it's like, I don't even want to watch that because I'll get contaminated if I do that.
Yeah. No, I'm with you 100%. And like my original, go to YouTube and type, WWE review, and you'll get a bunch of people like sitting in their closet with a web camera pointed at them. And I was like, okay, we need to be 180% different than that. You know what I mean?
Well, I've said the same thing when I had done the thrift store existentialism bit. The theory behind it was I lived at home, and my mom had a stockpile of my old bed sheets from when I was a kid. And I remember I was joking to a friend, and she never did it, but I joked to her, like, how funny would it be to try to be the Conan O'Brien if Conan O'Brien had to host a talk show from his bedroom, his parents' house?
Yeah.
And we both loved the idea. We thought it was hysterical. It just didn't pan out. But I'm the type of person, like, I'm almost like a snob where if I was going to do a show, and I joked to Sean, and we had kind of, for a while before Mark's, Sean and I had talked about doing like a horror movie show. But I said, if I can't do it like, Joe Bob Briggs did Monster Vision or At the Drive-Thru on the movie channel, I don't want to do it. Because essentially it's too awkward, not to be insulting here, but I'll say on my end, I'm not a very attractive looking guy. It's just another unattractive person on YouTube shooting a homemade video from their bedroom.
Yeah.
Like, it had to be different than that. I would rather be an unattractive guy hosting it in a set that looks like a trailer park and create the atmosphere of you're at the drive-in talking about horror, something like that, And that's what I liked about Europa. We had a very similar, we don't want to do a wrestling show like everyone else is doing wrestling shows kind of approach.
Yeah. No, that definitely. Because, I just wanted it to be upon sight some visual credibility to us. That's why it looks the way it is. That's why, and the original idea was like, okay, we're doing commentary. We're the commentary team for a wrestling the world of wrestling. And that's why we sit at an announce table with monitors with fucking headsets on. Like, that was the look. I was like, okay, well, that immediately grants us like credibility. Cause I remember being at the studio and being like, oh wow, like we have headsets here. I could almost look like Joey Styles or something like that. And I was like, fucking genius. Like, we just put a tablecloth down and that's our set. Like,
right.
We don't have to overdo it. And I remember putting up like the Titantron behind us. And I'm like, okay, that's simple. Like, nothing that looked like I could have, I've got wrestling t-shirts. I could have hung coat hangers up behind us full of wrestling t-shirts, but that immediately is like, oh, well, it just looks like wrestling t-shirts duct taped to the wall or whatever. So I just wanted it to be, upon visualizing it, upon seeing it, you go, wow, like they have their act together. Like, that's the great thing. It's like, hide the negatives and accentuate the positives. That's always been the goal of the show.
Well, one of the additions that I love to this show is the fact that we are on Twitter at MO Commentary, and we do have a voicemail box, 972769418. Now, I feel like we've given, if people even listen to the show, if they're even fascinated or interested or whatever, I don't have expectations for anything we do, and I'm always surprised when one or two people repeat something we did on a show. But I know Jason, and equally as I am, would be fascinated if you listen to the show, if you actually had questions for us.
Yeah.
I mean, again, we're not, and that's the funny thing, and I'm going through as a writer, writing a book about some stuff I went through was, who the fuck cares about you? You're not famous. We're not famous at all. Like, we're two guys that we work full-time jobs, we're engaged, and, we're trying to figure out our situation, but we love wrestling.
Yeah.
I don't care if you want to ask us certain aspects about our childhoods as they correlate to wrestling, or, you hear this and you're like, hey, you were telling me this story. Can you kind of elaborate on it? But
if you want to know about working in television, video, friggin' radio, I'm sure we're open to, what you can do, how you should go about doing it. Cause the route that I went before, I wouldn't go again, but
with radio, there's really no other, I did everything by the book, according to most of my mentors. It just, everybody's meant to do something. And I sincerely believe everybody's meant to do something. It's just a matter of the endurance of reminding yourself every day, like, if it's not this, it's something.
Yeah.
But 978-276-9418, that was Mark's off commentary. And I would be genuinely surprised to see, I know our Podomatic account is still kind
By
of...
the time this goes up, it'll be up there.
So, once again, from Mark's off commentary, I'm Eddie Brophy.
I'm Jason Smith.
And provided that we get any Twitter questions or any, if our voicemail box is inundated by calls, I would love to talk to our listeners, and not so much even if you don't want to know about us, tell us a little bit about you. Because, we have people like Michael Sears and Big Jim, and
all these people have been integral parts of, the last year.
So, I mean, anyone that has anything they want to say, whether it be about us or themselves, feel free. I mean, this is WrestleMania week, and I know, Jason, it's not our 100th show, and this feels like the type of show you would reserve if, like, you had made it or it was your 100th show, whatever. For Jason and I, I've said that we've been doing this for a year. It's a pretty big deal because we don't make anything off of it. In fact, we have to make the time to do this. Like, we have to, kind of ignore what other things we have going on or rush through our day to say that, no, like, we're committed to doing this because it's something we want to do. It's a hangout point. It's like the water cooler for wrestling fans, and we're determined to keep that as authentic as we can. And it's not, we came out with T-shirts. I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. I remember Jason and I both kind of agreed. If they don't sell, they don't sell, as long as we get our own shirts out of it. Yeah. It's never been about money because, quite frankly, it's not being made. My proudest moments on this show as of late have essentially been writing tweets that people think are good or hysterical or worth retweeting, getting snarky comments from Mike Wendt of the Mike and Billy Show, which are just, that guy is just gold. Just little subtle trivial things that come up where somebody will, like the tweet tonight where everybody knows Jason was carrying on because we did the Marks on anything. We were so proud of it. And Jason both had that, like, want to cry stage of, like, there's no audio. But for me, it was like when someone's like, where's the elephant in the room? Where's Eddie? That's cool to me because it's like, well, Jason's doing some stuff. Where the fuck's the other guy? Stuff like that is just cool in a very trivial but very sincerely, like, oh man, that's so cool sense. Because again, we're two guys that record this. Jason's in Saugus, I'm in Stoneham. We haven't made it. We probably won't make it doing this, but we're just kind of enjoying getting to know the other people like us that are kind of hiding and are kind of waiting for anything to be like, it's okay to say you like wrestling, and you get excited or you get disappointed or whatever about wrestling because you're not going to find on message boards because people on message boards are fucking assholes. It's the internet.
Like, the goal for me has been, like, let's make a community of like-minded people. That's why I opened up, like, the blog for people. That's why, I'm not afraid. If you're a nice person and you're doing something else in wrestling and you don't fucking try and steal our stuff and pass it off as your own, I'm totally willing to help you do anything. Just approach me. Don't mass spam me. Don't fucking, you know what I mean? Like, I want to help anybody that's doing something cool.
Yeah.
That's always been the intent. What can you do? Can you guys pitch us? Awesome. Let's, do our thing together.
I think for me, it's mostly, and I agree with Jason, is more or less like a community is essentially grounded by the fact that you have a bunch of people that are talented in very different areas. If, you're a good blogger, Jason already recruited you. I mean, not to say we're not good bloggers. We don't really have the time or the ambition to, I'm a writer, but I would rather write, quite frankly, I don't sound like a dick. I'd rather write my book than write a wrestling blog. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that I don't think it's awesome that other people are kind of like, shit, I'll write on your blog. That'd be awesome. Yeah. That's the community aspect of it, where Jason and I drop the ball or, that's where you guys pick up right back up and say, like, no, I'd love to do this because, again, it's one of those things. And for me personally, not to get sentimental before I wrap it up, I never expected to be 26 and have a dad dying at 55, and not to steal the whole Kevin Smith thing. And Jason's a huge fan, and I'm equally a huge fan, but I'm a bigger fan of Kevin Smith, the person, when he told the story about how his dad died screaming. And I think about that now because it's more real for me now, which is any one of us can die screaming. But in the process, what did we do up to that point? Can we look back and truly say, like, you took all the shots that you could, And one of the things Kevin Smith said is, like, creativity should be supportive of creativity. And going with that theme is how I feel about this show Jason and I started doing a year ago, which is, we both One guy said, I want to be a radio DJ. The other guy said, I want to be a videographer. Did it quite work out in our favor?
But we kind of met in the middle, though.
Right. We met in the middle and it didn't quite work out, but we decided, you know what? We want to take that idea of community and mutual respect and say, where you're lacking, I'll make up for and excel. And where I lack, you'll do just the same. You'll excel. Same for all of you. I mean, I love the fact that we got a guy like Big Jim who does his podcast. Big supporter of ours. I love the fact that I did a suicide prevention walk, which is where I essentially met my fiance. And somebody donated $45 to me simply because on Twitter or on the show, I announced that, yeah, I've tried to kill myself because of all those things we've talked about, because life can be such a pain in the ass and you don't know where you're going, you know, and that's cool. And Jason's sending me a message on Facebook telling me we need to.
I'm trying to be discreet, sir.
He's being very discreet, but I'm not. So 978-276-9418 at MO Commentary. This has been a very non-wrestling show, but we would love your feedback. So for Mark's Off Commentary, I'm Eddie Brophy.
I'm Jason Smith.
And if we hear from you guys, we'll do part 2.